Thank you very much, Nanette. Congratulations on pronouncing Waikato correctly. That's quite a difficult name, some of the ones down here. Good morning to you all from New Zealand time. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you also for the ACR inviting us in to give this talk. I want to start by acknowledging my two co-authors who are in the virtual room with us. Hugh O'Connor, who's also at the University of Waikato on the Tauranga campus. I think he's there because of the beaches and the surfing, and Scott Koslow in Sydney. I want to start with a quote. It's a common way to start things, but Albert Einstein said a lot of things which I think are still pertinent today. And for this bit of work, I think it's particularly pertinent. We're really looking within this paper at why creative ideas are rejected. We think about that for a moment. A lot of our own ideas, I'm sure, are sitting there waiting for a chance to get out. When we look at this quote by Einstein, he said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we use to generate them. Now, when I first started looking at this process of understanding the creative thinking process better, I thought about that quote and I thought to myself, okay, so is the problem in regards to the people who are generating the ideas? So there's a lot of issues, of course, with idea generation. And I think most of us, when we started looking at creative thinking processes, started from that perspective of looking at divergent thinking. Are we good divergent thinkings? Then we started to look at those environmental factors which assist us or stop this creative thinking process. Some of the information that's coming in from external environmental factors, some of the constraints in our environment. But the more I looked at it, the more maybe I overcame some of my naivety, and the more I saw things like this quote here, the second one by Malia and colleagues, where she said, and it's not her words, these are words from a senior creative in an agency, but these words are quite pertinent. They said, every day I have a baby which I take to a meeting and 12 people beat it with sticks. And that made me think, okay, maybe this way of thinking, this old way of thinking, isn't just about this creative ideation process, the idea generator developing new ideas. It's also about the way of thinking that other people who actually take those ideas and have to evaluate them are thinking. And the more you look at it in the advertising space in particular, the more the research points to this problem of external evaluation of creative ideas. We can generate really wonderful ideas, certainly ideas that we think are highly creative, but one of the big issues, will external people see the value in those creative ideas? Certainly in terms of a lot of the research we've done, one of the things that comes up very, very strongly time and time again is this problem of the client not being open to ideas. And again, you're going to get this issue coming up again and again when you talk to creatives. And when we talk to creatives, the other thing they said was, okay, so where are your best ideas? And they said to us, essentially a lot of those best ideas are in our bottom drawer. And I'm sure, again, we have this problem, all of us, when we generate creative ideas. This is not unique to advertising. Certainly in my own work, I feel frustrated at times because I think I've got a really good creative idea, I've developed it, I've expanded upon it, but getting it through review processes in the academic world is difficult, just like trying to get things past a client in the advertising environment can be very difficult. So I want to have a look at this process of creativity. And again, do we really get our best ideas out there? And is it a problem between the evaluation of our ideas internally and that of external evaluators? But first we need to look at what we're talking about in regards to that construct itself. And that comes up in the next slide. So if we look at creativity, the construct, generally people look at it from two perspectives. And it's accepted by most that a creative idea has to be both original and appropriate. If we ask people on the street what creativity is, they tend to focus on the originality of the novelty aspect. And of course, that's really critical, particularly in advertising. We need that novelty, we need that originality to grab the attention of that audience. So certainly originality is well accepted as a construct. The other concept in here, of course, is appropriateness. We've got to have ideas which aren't just original, from a creative perspective, the client's needs are going to have to be met. It's going to have to move consumers through some sort of process, maybe awareness, maybe changes in brand attitudes, and hopefully at some stage purchase or reinforcement of loyalty. So our message that we put together needs to be both original, able to grab attention, get the right sort of cognitive capacity going from the audience, but it's also got to be appropriate. It's got to be on message, say the right thing. So if we look at creative ideas, they're really a continuum between ideas which score on these two elements, low to high. Great creative ideas, of course, are high in both. A lot of creative ideas, however, and if we're looking at this model, key question is, who's this evaluation? Who's taking this evaluation? Who's doing this evaluation? So, of course, we might develop an idea and we see it as both highly original and highly appropriate. A lot of those ideas, of course, we know from history, there's a lot of really good ideas that weren't seen as creative at the time. They were seen as bizarre. So there seems to be this issue in terms of this appropriateness element in terms of this creative construct. And again, talking to creative directors, I remember speaking to one in particular, and he had some wonderfully senior creatives, and he spoke to these people and they were able to jump across ideas really quickly and effectively. But he would always be saying, and he said to me on numerous occasions, I really wish these guys would be more appropriate, give the client what they want. Now that doesn't mean that the creative idea generator doesn't see it appropriate, but maybe that external evaluator doesn't have that same evaluation. So let's look at that in a bit further in the next slide. So we're really looking at this research at the differences between these internal evaluations and these external evaluations. As we said, creative ideas, they're different. They're not the routine ideas we can all see, we've all got knowledge of, and they're pretty easy to evaluate. These are ideas which are both high in originality and appropriateness. It's very difficult to actually develop ideas that do both in both of those measures at the same time. In regards to recognizing those components, if we're looking at the research, unfortunately, there's very little research. It's one of the reasons for the study that looks at differences between internal and external evaluations. What the research tends to do is look at how groups of judges evaluate these two components. But there's something which we can see in that research as well. So when we look at different groups of judges, what we're tending to find is that evaluations of originality are much more consistent than those of appropriateness. In other words, we can see ideas for originality, we can see if they're new or different, but then determining if those are relevant or appropriate to the situation is much more difficult. Now, of course, this is the external judgment. What about the internal judgment? Again, we all have these ideas. We have these creatives who have got what they view as their best ideas in the bottom drawer. Does it mean, of course, those ideas should have made it out there? In many cases, no. Of course, there has to be a commercial imperative. But if these creatives are constantly having what they view as very good ideas rejected, then we're going to have some motivational problems. And we see a lot, or quite a high turnover in this industry. So we want to look at some of these differences. Also, there's another element in there in terms of the expression quality of the idea, which we've got to take into account. Of course, if ideas aren't well expressed, then it's harder for people to process them, and there might be reluctance to process them at all. It's harder to get that idea across. So what we're looking at, and we'll bring up the next slide, is really the creative thinking process. So we try to not just look at the fact that differences exist between internal and external evaluations. We really wanted to get into the why, because that's what I think we should do, of course, in terms of getting a better understanding of these processes. So we thought, let's have a look at what we know about this creative idea generation process and how that might influence the evaluation processes that differ between the internal evaluators and the external evaluators. So most of us, when we're doing creative thinking processes, we're doing some sort of combination process. We're combining domains or areas of thought which haven't been combined in that way before. And this creates something which is novel. So I've done that little diagram up the top to sort of show that. We often talk about domains of knowledge. So if I have rocket science and I have marketing and I combine those two domains, because those two domains, as we always say, marketing's not rocket science, those two domains aren't really strongly related to each other. We don't, there's not a lot of connections between the two. If I somehow make this unusual connection between those two ideas, then I'm going to have something which is highly original. The problem, of course, is I would have gone out, I would have done research, I would have got information, I would have used my own internal knowledge, and then I'll come up with this cross-combination process. So I have essentially, with that knowledge, which I've internalized, combined two distant domains. Now, because I've developed knowledge of those domains in order to combine them, when that creative leap occurs, what happens is we get this moment, and Schilling talks about this very well in an article, of insight, where suddenly there's a cascade of connections between those two domains. And so internally, and again, we've all had this wonderful feeling, we come across this wonderful insight, we connect two ideas within our own minds in this new way. We have this excitement because suddenly everything falls into place. Now that's based upon our own internal processes of developing those ideas. We've built up those domain knowledge, and then we've made this distant connection between domains which aren't normally associated with each other, and most people wouldn't have any internal connections between those ideas. So we've crossed these two different domains. We can see that originality and would expect, of course, other people to be able to see that originality. We can see if somebody's combined rocket science and marketing, that that's an unusual combination. The difference, we suspect, is, of course, that we as internal evaluators can see its appropriateness, but it's much more difficult to get external people to see that. And again, this is shown in that external research, but we wanted to look at that in regards to internal versus external evaluations. So let's have a look at that in the next slide.
Your evaluation summary is up, Mark.
Yeah. Yeah, can I have the next one? Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, you're right. You can go back a step. Sorry. So just in evaluation, if I can go back to that last slide. So if we're connected to new domains, again, we will see that as original and would expect, again, because those are domains which are unusual to everybody, other people will also see that as original. But as I said, because we have, as an internal idea generator, developed those original connections between domains which we have internally built up, then we will see how they're appropriate. But for other people, of course, not having that same domain knowledge in that same way, it's harder for them to see the appropriateness. And then, of course, irrespective of the originality and the appropriateness, presentation skills are going to be important as well. So let's have a look at the next slide, please. So we studied this. We developed some hypotheses, essentially saying those same things. We'd expect those internal and external evaluations of an idea's originality will be more consistent between those internal and external evaluators than those of appropriateness. Again, easy to see the originality, hard to see the appropriateness. Internal evaluations of appropriateness will be higher than external evaluations of appropriateness. Again, we've built up that knowledge, so we'll see how those ideas work. The more original the internal evaluation of the idea, so the more we've jumped across to a distant domain, the harder that appropriateness of other people will be in terms of their evaluations. And finally, would expect this expression quality to come in here as well. Can you bring up the next slide, please? So what are some of the results? Well, what we found is, of course, we can all see these original ideas. We make sense of our creative ideas, but external judges did have problems with that appropriateness. Again, we found these hypotheses were all supported in terms of the research we did. And this was an experimental design where creative people and agencies, creative and account executives developed ideas, and then we had external judges doing an evaluation of them. So we can see our own ideas based upon our own knowledge, but there's some real problems other people seeing those ideas, particularly when the expression is poor. So can I get the next slide just to show this diagrammatically? So this is really just showing what some of those things we found. So between self-assessment, again, we've got positive self-assessments of originality. The higher they are, then it's more likely that external judges will also see that as original. So we can see originality. The problem, of course, is with the fact that the more original ideas we create, the bigger the leap we make, then it causes problems in terms of external judges seeing the appropriateness. They have problems following those leaps because we've made these internal leaps, all this cascade of connections has occurred, harder for external people to see the appropriateness of those ideas. And then for both original and appropriate ideas, expression quality was an important factor, more so for the appropriateness than the originality. Again, we can see those original ideas. Can we move through? So we made a slight adjustment to the overall diagram. Can you just click the button one more time? And that is the need, and maybe one more time, to add an artistry element there as well. Big C ideas, again, because this problem of external judges evaluating them externally don't speak for themselves. And then finally, I'll just run through some implications in the next slide quickly. I realize I'm running out of time. So what does this mean for organizations? Certainly we need to educate. One of the issues if we want to keep our people motivated, then one of the things we can do with those creative staff is let them know about these differences between internal and external evaluations, particularly around this area of appropriateness. We need to train our young creative talent with the tools and techniques and give them the language of marketing strategy so they can get their ideas across to the client. We need to emphasize selling skills, and certainly agency personnel will tell us time and time again that half their job is actually that selling expertise. When we're evaluating ideas, we try to avoid using rules of thumb, such as past success as a basis for the evaluation of ideas. This, of course, is difficult because it is hard to evaluate ideas, and we need creative ideas. And then finally, on the next slide. So gatekeepers, of course, are critical in the advertising agency. I think we need to do a lot more research into the creative director, ensure that they're there to do this evaluation process in an open way. And often, again, a key role they do is the championing of ideas when they see the merits of them. Of course, setting up the correct environment of rewards and encouragement is critical. And just a final note, because I realise I've talked a wee bit too long, it's a difficult job being creative. Again, you develop a whole lot of expertise. You've got the ability to jump across different domains. You do this research into different areas so you can actually make those ideas appropriate. You come up with these highly creative ideas, but then it's up to the next person, that external person's knowledge, expertise, and evaluative abilities to actually then determine whether that idea actually makes it out there. Thank you for your time.